Welcome to Jackie's Craft Table.
Hello everyone, welcome. In this video, I'm creating cards with Simon Says Stamps October card kit. It's called Sketched Flowers. The kit for this month was particularly awesome just because it included so many neat products that I had never used before. This kit was all about alcohol ink blending and lifting and foiling. This is the Alcohol Lift ink pad, and it's a new product out on the market. These are some beautiful Gina K design foil cards. I'm just going to save these three for another day. I don't have a laminator, but there's a lot of beautiful examples on YouTube of what people have created with these three cards. It included a few sheets of Yupo paper. It's a Simon Says stamp brand. When you cut them in half, you'll have 6 A2-sized sheets of paper. This is a non-porous paper, so it's going to work great with your alcohol inks. This is a variety pack of fancy foils. They're all in autumn colors, and I believe there's 12 sheets in there. I absolutely love this set of stamps. It's called Sketched Flowers, and it has a lot of beautiful sentiments in it. This set is very versatile. You don't have to just use it for fall, as I show in some of my cards in this video. Here are the alcohol inks. They're beautiful fall-time colors, and the colors are Sunshine Yellow, Stream, and Sunset Orange. I'll take these out of the bag and show you these. I've seen these inks at the craft stores, and they sell them in sets of 3. I'm going to have to get more because I had a lot of fun playing with these. Next up is the example sheet that they include in all of their kits. I love seeing what other people have done with the stamp set. One of my favorite things about these kits is the cardstock. They always include very beautiful, well-coordinated colors. The colors this time are peacock, bright yellow, and burnt orange. And I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little off. I've been battling a cold and cough all week. Whenever my kids get sick, I inevitably catch it too. I wanted to open up this pack of foils just so you could see all of the beautiful colors it included. There are techniques that you can do with these that you don't need a laminator, and I will show you in some of my cards. So, of course, I had to start out with the alcohol inks because I've never tried this technique before. I don't know why, but I had so much fun doing this. I'm putting down the ink first, and then I'm going to put down some blending solution. I did have to go out and buy a bottle of this, but it was worth it. It really helps the colors move around on the paper. So when I first started doing this card, my kids came in, and they were all like, "What are you doing, Mom?" After I finished this panel, they wanted to try it, so I let them each have a piece of the Yupo paper, and they had so much fun. They used a straw too, and they liked blowing the colors around. I'm afraid my son got a little too spitty with it, and so his ended up with extra moisture. I was glad I put this card panel on top of a paper towel because I'm blowing off the excess with my straw. I didn't want it to go too dark or too muddy looking, so I'm trying to keep my colors separate. I let it dry for a few minutes, and I'm going to use a piece of foil. The parts of this card that are still tacky will pick up this pretty foiling, and it ends up looking like marble. It's so beautiful. I'm using another paper towel just so I can slide my fingers and hands easily across the paper and get it all to adhere. Peeling it up is the fun part because you see how it catches on bits of your panel, and it's so gorgeous. I'm trying to turn this panel so that you can see the foiling on it. I'm going to press it down again just to see if I can't get more to adhere, because more shine is always better, right? I don't know why I was always hesitant to try this technique. It always looked kind of messy, but it sure was fun to play with. You can see how the orange foil just sparkles off of this panel. So I highly suggest giving it a try if you haven't. I put a piece of Be Creative tape across this panel, It's a double-sided adhesive. I just wanted to see how that would pick up the foil, and it did a beautiful job. I'm going to cut this piece of paper down along the diagonal stripe of foil. I'm just being very careful. I don't even know how this paper cuts at this time, but it cuts beautifully. I'm using a piece of the peacock cardstock to put my sentiment on. I'm using the sentiment that says, "Thinking of you." I'm going to heat emboss that with some white embossing powder. So I used my anti-static tool first, and then I ink that up a couple of times. The stamp positioner tool sure comes in handy when you want to ink things up more than once. And the white embossing powder just pops off of this beautiful cardstock. Now I can melt it, and it melts fast because the lines are very fine. And now I'm going to put my card together. I'm adding my piece of peacock cardstock onto a white card base. And now for the piece of Yupo paper. I think these alcohol inks, this look, would be great for masculine cards. I wanted to use up every scrap that I had left of this pretty panel, so I'm putting that on the inside of the card to decorate that. Once I adhere that strip, I can just cut off the excess, and that's all it needs to create a gorgeous interior design for your card. Here's one more look at this card. On card number 2, I want to try out the alcohol lift ink. And so I'm creating another panel with these alcohol inks. I want this panel to be more green, so I'm allowing the yellow and the blue inks to really blend this time, blowing them around a lot with the straw. I'm adding lots of blending solution, and then I'm just, again, blowing the excess off onto the paper towel. And I'm not going to put any foiling on this one because I didn't know how well that would work with this alcohol lift ink. So I put this in my stamp positioner, and I'm going to see how this works. So once I lift this up very carefully, I go ahead and I rub off the excess ink on this panel. I should have actually put in my piece of white cardstock and stamped that down right away. But I was so intrigued with this alcohol lift ink. I just wanted to see this ethereal looking cluster of flowers appear. It's so pretty. And then once you have dabbed off all of the ink, you can rub it even more to make the lines appear. Make sure to let this panel dry completely before you use your alcohol lift ink. That line in the center of this panel is from my straw. It had rolled in the center of this panel while it was drying and I didn't notice, but it still looks pretty. The ink from this panel is still on my stamp, so I am going to use a piece of white cardstock and try and stamp that ink onto it. And like I said, I should have done that right away. So it doesn't stamp out very dark, but it was still very pretty and variegated looking. I didn't want to waste this panel. So I'm going to make it work. I'm going to pull out some Prismacolor pencils in similar colors and go over my lines. I do try stamping this out twice, but it doesn't make much of a difference, I'm afraid. This will be card number 3, but I just wanted to show you how I did this. That's still very pretty. Back to card number 2, I used a faux stitched frame die to cut out a piece of this panel. And then I'm going to mat that on a piece of the bright yellow cardstock. But I did put some foam tape behind it just to prop it up a little bit. I center that on my card, and for my sentiment, I'm using the sentiment that says hello. It's such a beautiful scripty looking font to it. And then I can die cut this with one of my banner dies. I'm going to use a little more Be Creative tape behind this. And I'm going to adhere that flat down onto my card panel. I don't know how well things stick on top of this Yupo paper and alcohol ink, so I wanted to use a tape that was really strong until I've had the chance to play with it a little more and see how well it does, how well it holds up. I also pulled out some sequins, and I'm just going to use the colors that match this card panel and glue a few of them onto this card. I really love these sequins. They're called Crystal Reflections, and they're from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm almost out, so I'm going to have to get another bag. I use these a lot. To decorate the inside, I'm using up another strip of the leftover Yupo paper. And then I'm just going to stamp out the pretty flower. Very simple, but it's pretty. And then a few dots just to add a little more interest. And that completes card number 2. Here's another peek at the inside. For card number 3, I'm using some Prismacolor pencils. I already went over the lines just to darken them. I did that off camera. And now it's time to color in this image. I'm doing very simple coloring. I have all of the Prismacolor pencils that I used listed over on my blog if you're interested in that. And then as I was coloring, I noticed that I needed a little more contrast. So I'm using a really dark blue colored pencil to add contrast in between the petals of these flowers. That sure adds a lot. And I could have kept going on this, but I thought it looked pretty, and so I cut it down a little bit. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment that says hi right at the bottom. I'm stamping it out with black ink just so it stands out a little bit from all of my coloring. And now I can put this card together. I'm taping on a frame. I used one of my frame dies and I cut it down a little bit. I don't have a frame that narrow, but I wanted it to be a little more narrow so you could see the blue peacock cardstock from behind it. I'm using some dry adhesive just to adhere all of these panels together. I also sometimes use the liquid adhesive because it does give you some wiggle room to position your card just perfectly on your card base and on your different cardstocks. However, sometimes I do put a little bit too much on and it kind of makes your cardstock bubble up. So lately I've been using my dry adhesives a lot. I'm adding a little bit of Wink Stella just on this one flower. And I could have added more sequins to this, and I think that would have looked really pretty, but I just kept it simple. I'm going to do a little more stamping on the inside of this card. I love the single leaf and flowers that this stamp set includes. So I'm going to stamp a few inside my card. And then I'm going to color them in again, and you could just leave it plain. They just look pretty in black and white. But I couldn't help but pull out my Prismacolor pencils again and color those in. I'm going to use the same colors I used on the outside of my card. And I'm just coloring them in very simply. Not a lot of blending, just putting down some color. When I do coloring on the cards in this video, I'm trying to keep the paper more still because I know it's easier to watch that way, and it's more fun to watch to see the progress of the pencils in fast motion. Some of my card panels I even tape down so I won't forget. Here is a look at my completed card. I think that turned out so soft and pretty. Card number 4, I wanted to have a fall-like feel to it. And I'm going to use a medium that I rarely use. I'm pulling out my Jelly Roll pens. I always use my white Jelly Roll pen, to add details on my cards, but I rarely use the colors, so I wanted to figure out how to use them on this card. The Jelly Roll pens look really fabulous on craft cardstock. So I put down a lot of ink, and then I kind of smudge it up the petal with my finger. This is kind of a fun technique, and it just helps the color move and blend a little bit, or I should say soften a little more. And it was a lot of fun to do, so give this technique a try. It's really fun. It does get your fingers dirty, but it washes off easily. I also tried blending it with a blending stump, but it didn't have as good a result as using your fingers and getting kind of messy that way. Just make sure you put down lots of ink and then just smudge it out. And I was surprised it didn't cover the black lines of my image. It was really nice. I'm just putting down a little bit of color here. I'm not going to color the whole flower, all of the petals. I just want an indication of color. And I'm using fall time colors of orange and plum, and even a teal color Jelly Roll pen. I think this card is my favorite of the 10 that I've created for this video. I think craft cardstock works really well for your fall-themed cards. This coloring did go really fast because I'm not coloring in the whole flower and I'm not doing any blending. However, I do come in with a darker plum colored Jelly Roll just to add a little more dimension to my purple flowers. And then I really like how the white looks, so I add a few details with my white Jelly Roll as well. I'm going to have to use my gel pens more often. They come in such pretty colors. They do come in metallics, and I have a few of those in my stash, but for this card I just wanted to use more of the matte colors. And as you can see, I did tape this panel down just to keep it still. I'm using a sentiment that says, "So thankful." It's from another older stamp set that I have in my stash. I'm even going to color in some of the letters in this sentiment. This adds a really cute touch. I end up getting a big smear on the top right corner of this card. I don't know how I did that, but I'm going to hide that with some sequins. So I put a large one up there to hide that smear. And I'm going to add a few more around the panel. And these are some more of the crystal reflections. I made a card base out of a piece of the peacock cardstock from this kit. And I'm going to adhere my panel right onto that. And now I can decorate the inside. And I'm just using the single flower stamps again for this. And I'm going to color these images in with more gel pens. The white sure pops well on this peacock colored cardstock. Here's a look at the finished card, as well as the inside. It's just very simply colored on the inside. On card number 5, I'm going to make my own pattern paper using some of the single stamps from the set. I just love this leaf stamp. It's so pretty. And then I'm also going to pull out 2 of the sentiments and stamp them around the panel. The sentiments say hi and hello. And I like the look of the text in the pattern. I'm using more Prismacolor pencils to quickly add some color onto this panel. I'm just going to color in one of each stamp just to show you what I did. I'm using some pinks and greens, and I'm going to color in the daisy-like flower in white. I always use Prismacolor's white pencil. It just has a stronger pigment to it. Even when I'm using my Faber-Castell pencils, I never use their white. It just isn't as sharp and strong as the Prismacolors. I'm going to adhere this to a pink card base. And I'm going to stamp out a little bit of the pattern on this corner of the inside. And I'm using the same colors to color these in. It's really fun using colored pencils on your colored cardstocks. It sure makes the images pop. I decided to add a little more interest to the pattern with some Jelly Roll pens. I'm just putting little dots here and there with the different colors. Make sure you give your Jelly Roll pens time to dry because they do smear, and I know this from experience. On the inside, I pull out a black marker just to add the dots back into the middle of this flower. And then I'm going to add more dots with my Jelly Roll pens. And that completes card number 5. I didn't add another sentiment to this card, so this is just going to be more like a note card. It does say hi and hello, but that's my only sentiment. On to card number 6, and I'm working on another piece of craft cardstock. And I want to make this into a masculine birthday card. I stamped out the sentiment with some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and then I poured over some clear embossing powder. This just helps the sentiment to pop a little bit more. And I'm going to create another pattern. I'm going to stamp this flower out 3 times across this panel. I'm going to use some more foils on this panel. So I cut out some circles from Stick It adhesive, and I wasn't sure if this was going to work, but I'm just pressing this adhesive into the card panel and then pulling off the release paper. The Stick It adhesive is a very thin adhesive. It didn't hold its shape very well. And this is the first time I've tried this, so I wasn't sure how it was going to work. But they didn't form perfect circles, but I'm going to continue on. But I like the effect of this. It turns out to be kind of a shabby chic card. I'm pressing the foil into this adhesive. I'm using 2 different orange foils for this. And at first I was going to scrap this card because they weren't forming perfect circles at all. But once I finished with all of the foiling, I kind of liked the effect. I'm going to be coloring in these flowers with some blue Prismacolor pencil. And I used blue because it's a complementary color to orange. And it looks really striking once this card is complete. So you'll have to see what you think. So I'm using a dark colored blue pencil first, and then I come in with a lighter colored blue, and then I kind of blend that together with a white colored pencil. And I'm not sure about flowers on a masculine card, but I think I could get away with it with this card because of the colors. I cut this panel down with one of my frame dies, and I'm going to adhere that right onto a burnt orange card base. I'm going to do more foiling on the inside. I'm using some very narrow Be Creative tape. And I'm just going to peel off one at a time and use the 2 different orange foils over those. So here's the first one, and I'm going to use the holographic foil. And I'm just pressing that really hard into the adhesive, and then you can peel that right off. And for the next one, I'm just going to use the plain orange foil. I'm just making sure to press that adhesive into the paper as well so it sticks. It has a very pretty effect, and I'm really liking this foil. Here's a look at the finished card. What do you think? Does that work? I really kind of liked this card. back to more alcohol ink blending. I want this panel to be mostly green because I'm going to make a Christmas card. I want to add some red foil over this panel, so I'm putting down lots of ink. Where the ink pools up in lines on the panel is where it's going to be tackiest and where the foil is going to stick to it really well. So I'm trying to create lots of lines in this panel. I let it dry for a few minutes, not too long so it doesn't completely dry. And then I come in with my red foil. And I'm just using another piece of paper just to be able to slide my hands across this panel. And then I can peel up this foil and show you how gorgeous this red foil looks on the green. For the sake of time, I went ahead and stamped and colored in this flower stamp off camera. I will still have the Copic markers I use listed over on my blog. And I want to put a thicker piece of foil at the bottom of this panel. So I'm using some more adhesive. I cut off the excess, and then I'm going to peel up the release paper. I'm going to use the same red foil on this. And this was a new roll of tape, so I didn't realize that there was a sticker on there, but I just kept going. There's nothing I could do at that point, so the foil hit it pretty well. And that just leaves a pretty red stripe at the bottom of this panel. So gorgeous. I cut down my alcohol ink blended panel. And I'm putting this right onto a card base, and I'm leaving a strip of white at the top. I'm adhering my Copic colored panel flat onto that. For the inside, I'm using another strip of leftover Yupo paper. And my sentiment comes from another old stamp set I have. It just says Merry Christmas. And I'm making that into a banner. And I'm going to adhere that flat onto the card as well. The Yupo paper panel is a lot more dramatic than my Copic colored image, so I wasn't sure how well they meshed together, but it was a lot of fun to put together. Here's one more look at this card. And the inside's just very simple, just a piece of that Yupo paper. So I made a fall time card using this beautiful stamp set, as well as a Christmas card. And now I'm going on to create a Valentine card. I think this stamp is so versatile. You can change it into anything you want. So I'm stamping it onto a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I'm keeping the stamp where it is on my stamp positioner. And I'm going to put in a piece of pink cardstock and stamp it in the exact same place. I'm using the purple tape just as a guide so I know where to put my cardstock so they stamp out the same. I'm also using some VersaFine Onyx black ink for both of these. I really like this ink. It does stamp out nice and crisp and dark, and it also allows you to heat emboss over it. So I'm using clear embossing powder. I want the lines of this stamp to be a bit raised and glossy. It really makes them look glossy and shiny. Now I can melt the embossing powder. And it's easy to see once it's melted because it turns bright, shiny black. And I'm moving my heat tool around a lot so it doesn't warp the paper. And now I'm cutting down these panels. The first one's going to be a rectangle, and it's a faux stitched die I used on that. In my second panel, I'm going to cut out a heart. It's fun to use your Copic markers on top of colored cardstock. It just gives you a base color to work with. I don't do this very often, but I sure enjoyed this process. And I forgot to tape this panel down, but I do hold it pretty still. This is just some quick Copic coloring. I really love how bright this red shows up on this cardstock. These colors really make the flowers pop. I wanted this flower to be white, so I'm going in with my Jelly Roll pen just to add a little bit of color to that. I guess I could have used my Prismacolor white pencil too. I'm going to use some foam tape behind this heart, as well as a few square dots, just to add a little bit of dimension to this die cut. And I'm not going to color in the white card panel at all. I'm just doing some spotlight coloring. And then I'm going to adhere this heart down right over the flowers so they connect. I want the flowers on these two panels to be perfectly aligned. Just has a pretty effect that way. And I went ahead and stamped the sentiment that says, "Love you," in the corner of this heart. And I'm adding some more crystal reflection sequins across this panel. On the inside, I'm adding some more heart die cuts. And that's all I'm doing. It's very simple design on the inside. And I think that turns out to be a very cute Valentine card. And it was pretty simple to create. I'm just going to add my panel onto this black cardstock base. I do use a little bit more Spectrum Noir on this flower in the front. I go back and forth between the Spectrum Noir and the Wink of Stella. I really like them both. I think the Spectrum Noir has a cooler tone to it. Here's one more look at this card. Card number 9 is another one of my favorites from this set of 10. And I think it's largely due to this burnt orange cardstock. I just think it's gorgeous. I'm going to have to get some more for my craft room. I die cut a circle out of this piece of paper, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment right onto that. And I'm going to heat emboss it with some white embossing powder. So I inked that up with my embossing ink. The white embossing powder really looks nice on this orange paper. As you can see, I already added some foam tape behind this panel. I wanted this panel to sit up a little higher than the flowers that I'm going to adhere in the center of it. So I'm going to adhere this right onto a white card base. I have a cute circle scalloped die in my stash, and I used that to cut out a piece of the bright yellow cardstock. I'm going to glue my flowers flat onto this circle. And all of them are going to be flat except for one of the orange flowers. I'm going to use a foam square behind that just to add a little dimension. The liquid adhesive is nice because it doesn't attach instantly. You still have time to move things and wiggle things around a bit before you decide where you want them. I colored these flowers with some Copic markers, and even though I didn't show the coloring, I do have the colors listed over on my blog. Then I'm going to adhere this whole circle on the center of my card. I cut out another scalloped circle from the burnt orange cardstock to decorate the inside of my card. And I'm using a Copic multiliner just to add a few cute dots around it. I'm not going to color it in this time, surprisingly enough. I'm just going to attach that flat on the inside of my card. I also cut out a strip of the burnt orange cardstock to put a stripe at the bottom of the card. And then I can flip that over and cut off the excess. I'm also using a Spectrum Noir glitter pen to put a little bit of glitter just on this one flower. And that completes card number 9. It's a simple card, but I think it's very elegant and pretty. Easy to make multiples of this card. For my last card, I had to do a little bit more of the alcohol ink blending. I had so much fun with that from this card kit. And I want this one to be really green and yellow. You could just keep adding and adding to these panels. It's just so fun to see the colors move around. And this panel is going to turn out pretty simple, but the colors are so beautiful. And then once that is dry, I'm going to use some more alcohol lift ink. Now, I used my acrylic block for this, and I didn't know that this ink on this panel was going to be so slippery, but you can see that my block just moves around so much. It didn't ruin it, but the lines do end up being a little bit thicker. I would suggest to use a stamp positioner for this. It was just really hard to hold the stamp still on top of this Yupo paper. Now I can blot off the ink and make the white lines of this flower appear. I'm stamping the excess on the inside of this card. I didn't want to waste this pretty ink. I'm just using the single flowers and the leaf image from this set for this card. The green ones don't show up very well on the white cardstock, but I'm not going to color them in. I think they just look nice and pretty on the inside of this card. It's really fun to rub off this ink and make the images appear. The leaf image, I'm going to try and get more of the blues. And this is a darker color, so it shows up really well on the white cardstock. Sorry, that's kind of off camera shot there. You see how dark it is. And I'm using a small square die to cut out these flowers from this panel. This die has some cute dot detailing along the edges. You can use whatever die you have in your stash, and you don't even have to use a die. You can just pull out your paper trimmer and cut these squares out. I think these die cuts look so pretty cut out of this Yupo paper panel. I'm going to use the leftover Yupo paper just to lift some inks to put on the interior of my card. Didn't want that to go to waste. I thought it needed a little bit more detail. And I'm also using a piece of the bright yellow cardstock. I haven't glued down my squares yet, but I'd kind of positioned those so I could know where to stamp my sentiments. And I'm going to heat emboss them with some clear embossing powder. Again, using my VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is an ink that stays wet long enough to heat emboss it. The sentiments say hi, hello, and so happy you're my friend. I thought this would be a cute friendship card. Since it's in the stamp positioner, I usually do stamp it up a couple of times. Then I can pour on the clear embossing powder, flick off the excess, and melt that with my heat tool. I'm going to adhere this down onto a white card base with some more dry adhesive. And I added some foam squares behind these die cuts. It gives it some cute dimension. I end up peeling off the bright yellow cardstock from my card base just because I thought it needed something more and I wanted to add some twine on this card. I added another strip of Yupo paper at the bottom of the inside of my card. And there you can see the cute twine bow. I think it just adds a lot to this card. And here's another look at the inside. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you've been inspired to sit down and create some wonderful cards of your own. This was a really fun card kit to work with. I know you can buy the elements from this card kit separately if you want. Check out my blog if you want to see still shots of all of my cards. Help support my channel. Check out my Etsy shop. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye.